Okay, so we're here ready to put the engine in the bus, and this means I'll need to remove the old cross members as they don't work for the new engine. The rear one easily unbolted, however the front one needed to be cut out. I later completely removed the side pieces as they got in the way of the new mounts. Now remember this old mount that I ordered a replacement for and I got this one? Well, I tried really hard to understand how it would work, but I couldn't work it out. So after some internet searching, I found some replacement ones. So now with those, I'm ready to test the engine in the bus. You can see how they attach to the automatic transmission, and then I attached the crossmember to those so I would know what position they needed to go in. The engine looks great in the engine bay, however, I need to know exactly how far back the engine needs to go before I can fit the crossmember in place. This is where I came across one of my first hurdles. The flange on the existing tail shaft is a different size to the locator on the automatic transmission. So what I need to do here is take the existing flange from the truck's tail shaft and transplant it onto the bus's tail shaft. This requires a level of accuracy and engineering that I do not possess. So I took that to a professional who did just that. After a few coats of paint, I was able to get it in place and ready for the next step. The cross members from the truck bolt onto the mounting plates, and I was able to take these mounting plates from the truck chassis and use them in the bus. This makes it easier as all I need to do is make them fit in the bus chassis, as the chassis are slightly different sizes. One thing I took specific note of is the front plate sits 7 mm higher than the top of the rear plates. This will make a bit of sense later. Due to the bus chassis being narrower than the truck, I made these 25mm spacer plates for the top of the mount to rest on, as I wanted to keep these plates the same height. Then when the engine was in the bay and the transmission bolted to the tail shaft flange, I was able to clamp the mounts in their place and then remove the engine, leaving the crossmember behind. I then drilled holes from the top to bolt it down and added some cuttings from square tubing to the bottom section so I could bolt them from the side. Obviously I welded these tube sections to the existing plate. The reason why I didn't bolt them from underneath is because that would require removing all the springs and suspension, and this was way too complicated. For the front crossmember, I needed to have this bolted to the engine, and I overlooked this when I made the arms for the hoist. So I cut some holes in the arms and added some supporting steel to add more strength. Once this was done, the front crossmember could be bolted to the engine. With all of that in place, I then needed to work out the specific alignment of the front mounting plates. This gets complicated because the chassis in the bus is not uniformly straight like in the truck. It tapers down. So I created these guiding rails that I could rest the plates on and use some turnbuckles that allowed me to dial in the specific height I needed. Once I put the engine back in the bus, bolted the rear end in, I was able to then accurately adjust the rails for the plates and make sure they were straight. This allowed me to clamp the plates in place and then remove the engine again. I also needed to trim the bottom of the plates so they would fit, and I removed the brackets the radiator frame sat on, as I would be mounting these separately later on. I then used sections of square tubing that would be bolted to the frame and then welded to the plates. Using painter tapes, I was able to mark out the locations of an existing rivet to create an allowance hole, and then also drill the holes where it would be bolted to the chassis. I then repeated the same process for above with another piece of steel, and then patchworked it together to make a whole piece. A bit of spot welding held it together, and I took it to the workbench and properly welded it along with lots of grinding to flatten it out. So that's the bottom section of the bracket. I followed a similar process on the upper section and then did all of that over again for the other side of the chassis. After all that, I was ready to clamp it in place and spot weld it. I double checked it by putting the engine back in the bus first to make sure my positioning was correct. I welded everything together, removed the guiding rails, bolted the brackets in place, and then bolted the crossmember in place. Everything looks perfect. The time has come to see if I've done everything correctly. But before that, I actually have to remove the front crossmember and bolt it to the engine to install. This is due to the depth of the engine and transmission sump, and it's much easier to slide it in place and bolt the crossmember in when it's all lined up. So here we go, first attempt at this. Engine goes in slowly, making sure it's aligned. After bolting the transmission to the tail shaft flange, I lowered the hoist slowly, making sure the rear transition mounts are lined up, added the bolts and then bolted them in. Then I went to the front crossmember and aligned it up and bolted it in. Once I did this on both sides, I removed the bolts from underneath the hoist arms and slowly lowered the engine, and it all sat there perfectly. What a relief! This whole process took me about 100 hours, and I'm so glad it's done. To be honest, it was a bit daunting when I got to the stage where I needed to actually start working out exactly how I'd get the engine in there, but it's very rewarding to reach this milestone. Well, that's it for this video. In the next installment, I'll be doing a tour of inside the bus. Stay tuned for that. Let me know in the comments your thoughts, and I'll see you next time. Bye!